good evening. Well, Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese are rewarding a terrorist group for killing Jews. Israel is currently battling a defensive war to eliminate Hamas for slaughtering entire families, depriving children of their futures and leaving babies orphaned. Yet it's because of this war against the terrorists that Wong and Albanese have decided it's the right time to say that the pathway to peace is to recognise a Palestinian state internationally. Never mind the fact that those in control of Gaza don't want a two-state solution. They want the destruction of Israel. They don't want Jews to exist at all. This is who Penny Wong and her subservient Prime Minister are siding with. They also demand an immediate ceasefire, which would mean Israel lays down its arms while Hamas, the barbaric terror group that raped and slaughtered women and children and babies, stays in control of the Palestinians and rebuilds. This is warped thinking, an absurd absence of logic. How can Labor move to recognise a Palestinian state when Hamas is still in control? Well, Penny Wong makes a point of saying Hamas can't have a future role in Gaza, but then she also calls for an immediate ceasefire. She can never answer the question about how exactly Israel should get rid of Hamas if it lays down its arms with a permanent ceasefire.
So how do you remove Hamas from Gaza without a ground operation, in your view?
The question here is international humanitarian law and making sure that Israel complies with international humanitarian law.
And she prattled on about Israel not invading Rafah, where Hamas has retreated to, but she could never answer the question. Foreign affairs expert Greg Sheridan called Penny Wong's speech last night emotionally manipulative and substantially dishonest. And he recalls how Israel has, on 3 separate occasions, offered the absolute maximum that could conceivably be achieved in a Palestinian state. He writes in The Australian that senior officials from Bill Clinton's administration, in exhaustive memoirs, document how the Palestinian leadership, which lives splendidly well while its people suffer, rejected every such offer and constructed absurd demands that made it impossible. Yet Penny Wong's colleagues were out in force to back her up today. Not one of them criticised her. Not one Labor MP came out to criticise Penny Wong. Is there anyone left in federal Labor who still supports Israel? And if so, well, where are they? The coalition, however, did call out Wong and Albo's absolute nonsense.
If you come out and say the solution to this is an independent Palestinian state, you're simply rewarding the actions of terrorists.
Hamas is in charge in the Gaza Strip, and a decision like this by Australia, watched from that region, will be seen, I believe, only as emboldening the terrorists.
This is giving a public relations victory to Hamas for what they did on the 7th of October. The timing is all wrong.
And Simon Birmingham said that Penny Wong is acquiescing to terrorists. He says the timing of her speech is reckless, writing in an analysis piece that rather than putting pressure on Hamas to change course and agree to release the hostages it has held since October 7, the Albanese government is choosing to instead signal to Hamas that their pressure is helping to get a policy change they want. Birmingham writes that it is downright dangerous to reward such barbaric conduct with a one-sided fast track to recognition of statehood. Now, one of the more offensive things about Penny Wong's speech last night is that she put Hamas and Israel in the same category. Have a listen.
It isn't okay to blame anyone in Australia for the actions of Hamas. And it is not okay to blame anyone in Australia for the actions of the Netanyahu government.
As if the Netanyahu government and Hamas are comparable. One is a prescribed terror organisation that murdered, burnt, slaughtered and beheaded babies, children, women and men in the most depraved manner we've witnessed this century. The other is a democratically elected government that, while it's not perfect, although it's probably better than the Albanese government, but not perfect, it apologises for its mistakes and is accountable for its actions. So let's just listen to that again. Penny Wong basically comparing Hamas with Israel because clearly in her mind there are similarities.
It isn't okay to blame anyone in Australia for the actions of Hamas. And it is not okay to blame anyone in Australia for the actions of the Netanyahu government.
And by the way, no Jews or any other Australians are blaming fellow Australians for Hamas's actions. That's just not happening. Yet there are many pro-Palestinian activists engaging in horrific racism against Jews. And I can't even say it's because of the actions of the Netanyahu government, because this animosity started on October 7, right after the terror attacks. That Opera House protest was October 9. We've been experiencing racism simply because Jews in Israel were attacked by terrorists. We're experiencing racism simply for living. Now, for a long time, we've called out the Albanese government for showing zero leadership on anti-Semitism, for allowing it to fester and grow and cause insecurity in the lives of Australian Jews and their families. But now it's worse than a lack of leadership. Penny Wong and Albanese, their rhetoric is now fanning the flames of anti-Semitism. Australia has no impact on Israel's military response to Hamas, none. But Penny Wong and Albanese do have an impact on social cohesion here in Australia. And they're making the racism against hardworking Jews who contribute to Australian society far worse. They need to take responsibility for this anti-Semitism, and instead they're exacerbating it. And if you question this, well, have a look exactly who Penny Wong has given credibility to by posing in photographs with him and meeting him in her office. It's the head of the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network, Nasser Mashni. Well, today, Nasser Mashni actually compared Hamas to Nelson Mandela. He said the problem in the Middle East wasn't Hamas. The problem, he said, are the Zionists, the Jews. Because he says the Jews should really be living in Germany, not on his land. Have a look at this.
Israel does have a government, it's elected though. I'm asking you about Hamas, and I've asked you a couple of times. Is it a fair enough caveat to have Hamas, which does believe Jewish people should not exist?
Nelson Mandela spent 27 years on Robben Island. He only came off the US terrorist list, I think just before he died or just after he died. You know, one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist.
One man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist? No. Nelson Mandela did not decapitate soldiers or burn babies. Do we need to show Nasser Mashni the footage of babies killed in their tiny cots again? But it gets worse. Have a look.
What we need to do is move beyond this fascination or infatuation with Hamas, 186 days now after this uptick in the genocide, and start talking about Hamas is not the problem. The problem is Zionism, is settler colonialism, is a supremacist ideology that says a Jewish homeland has to come at the expense of the indigenous people. We have to move past time of these notions of Hamas.
So he says the problem is Zionism. Well, Zionists, by the way, are Jewish people who support Israel. I'm a proud Zionist, and so are 90% of Jews. So he's saying that Jews are the problem. And did you notice how he said we need to stop this fascination with Hamas 186 days after the uptick in genocide? And he's speaking about a so-called Israeli genocide there. He's not referring to the Hamas attack against Israel on October 7. Yet Penny Wong, Australia's foreign minister, gives credibility to this despicable character. It's this crowd that Labor is pandering to with its rhetoric and its policies. Federal Labor under Penny Wong's control and Albanese's weak leadership is morally corrupt. It has sacrificed its support for Australian Jews and has betrayed Australia's long-standing bipartisan friendship with Israel. It doesn't care about the safety of Jewish families or children. It doesn't care about principles because it has none left. As Simon Birmingham noted today, before the 2022 election, Labor promised the Australian Jewish community there would be no difference between the major parties on matters relating to the Middle East. Well, that commitment was blatantly false. It's yet another broken promise from a broken government. Now, I'm going to have a look at some other topics, but I am going to come back to this topic a bit later in the show. I'm going to be joined by Colin Rubenstein, also by Shadow Home Affairs Minister James Patterson. They have a lot to say. On my political panel later is Bridget McKenzie and Michael Danby, his former federal Labor. He is aghast at what his Labor Party has become, and he will not hold back. So wait, later in the show, Michael Danby will be unleashing on Penny Wong. But right now, let's have a look at how foreigners buying up precious property could be slugged with higher taxes. We're going to have a look at whether this will finally be the fix to Australia's housing shortage. We're also going to look at the fifth police spin doctor to be hired by Karen Webb. Will this person finally be able to clean up the police commissioner in New South Wales' mess, or will it be yet another scandal and blow to taxpayers? Also, Harry and Meghan are now meddling in US politics and misinformation. Is anyone going to listen to them? But let's bring in now former Victorian Liberal Party President Michael Kroger and former Labor Minister Graham Richardson. Welcome to you both. Look, just before we move on to other topics, Michael Kroger, I know you have a great interest in this topic. You've been a firm friend of Israel, so I'd just like to get your reaction to Penny Wong's speech last night.
Well, Sharri, it's hard to know where to start, but if she thinks there should be a Palestinian state, go ahead. What's stopping the Albanese government from supporting one, endorsing one? What's she waiting for if she believes that? But by the way, a Palestinian state, what? But Penny Wong says, oh, here from Australia, we're telling the Palestinians who they can and can't have run their government. I mean, has she asked the Palestinians who they want to run their own government, self-determination, etc.? If there's a Palestinian state, the Palestinians should be free to elect whoever they want to be their government. I mean, Hamas doesn't tell us in Australia the Australian Labor Party are not entitled to run for office. So the clear thing is, the clear point to Penny Wong is, well, Palestinians should be able to elect whoever they want. And self-determination, a Palestinian state, she's not entitled to dictate to Palestinians who they should and shouldn't elect. So it's farcical at every single level because, as we know, and we've just seen, more than half of the Palestinian populations that have been surveyed support Hamas. They would elect Hamas to be the government of this independent Palestinian state. Yet she says they're not entitled to run. Well, for goodness sake, I mean, Hamas is not like the Liberal Party or the Labor Party where they have membership records and annual general meetings and constitutions. They'll just get through for other people to say, no, we're not Hamas. We were in Hamas, but we're not any longer, to run the government there if there's a Palestinian state. The answer is this. Of course there's a two-state solution, but it isn't now. It isn't at a time when the majority of the Palestinian voters support Hamas and support the annihilation of the Jewish people throughout Israel and probably in other parts of the world. This was a disgraceful speech by Wong, an utter disgrace. And for her to be lecturing people about the Middle East, given her comments, she's reinstated funding to UNRWA. She calls for a ceasefire without any conditions. She refused to visit Kfar Aza, Near Oz. I was in Israel when she was. I went to these places. She was sitting in Ramallah and Jerusalem, wouldn't visit them. On and on it goes. She called for restraint very early on. This is an extremist government that Albanese and Wong are running on foreign policy, and her performance last night was utterly disgraceful.
Richo, is this all about politics? Is this all about Western Sydney seats that Labor's worried about losing, and also other seats in Victoria that Labor's worried that they're going to lose to the Greens? Is that what's behind this, or do you think it's, Penny Wong and Albanese who've, harkening back to their true activist selves that they've been since university?
Look, I doubt very much if we're too worried about the Greens picking up these seats. I don't think that's the problem at all. As far as the roots of Albo and Penny Wong in their student days, I'm not sure how relevant they are today. But I do worry about my own side sometimes, because when it comes to the existence of Israel, there can be no debate. We have long since adopted a policy of believing in the existence of the State of Israel, and we're not going to change that. As far as I'm concerned, that's an absolute. That is a basic pillar of our foreign policy, and it should stay that way.
It should, and yet it's not. Now, let's have a look at some of the other top stories today. The Minns government in New South Wales is considering taxing foreigners more when they buy property in New South Wales. The Treasurer, Daniel Mookhey, told the Daily Telegraph that the extra money would go towards building more homes. Have a listen.
I want to be confident that foreign investors are helping us build new homes rather than competing for the homes we've already built.
Richo, do you think this policy is a good idea? Would it be effective?
I think it's a very good idea. I think Mookhey's a star, by the way, and I think whenever he comes out, he's always worth listening to. He is an extremely clever man, and I think this is very, very good basic policy. What we have to do is look at how we get more homes out there. And I think Mookhey's been the best we've had in a long time at doing exactly that.
It has been a concern for a long time, so-called ghost houses where they're bought as investment properties by foreigners, Michael Kroger, but then they reportedly sit empty.
Yeah, that's right. I want to say one other thing on the equally important topic. Sorry, Sharri.
Are we going back to Israel?
I was at a lunch in Melbourne on the. Yeah, we are going back. I was at a lunch in Melbourne on the 10th of September, right? Yes. The 10th of September 2001, the day before 9/11. I was at a private lunch in Melbourne of 20 people at Crown Casino with President Clinton. And I asked President Clinton, who at that time had only left office 8 months before, and he'd had the negotiations with Yasser Arafat and Ehud Barak. And I said to Clinton at this lunch, I said, President Clinton, why in the end, given all the lengths you went to, why didn't Yasser Arafat sign the peace deal with Israel? And Clinton said, in the end, I'm not sure he ever wanted peace or that he could ever deliver peace. And that's the problem. The Palestinian leadership, then and now, do not want peace with the Jews. They do not want peace with Israel. They have a solution. It's called a one-state solution. It's called from the river to the sea. Yeah. And that is the problem, right? Yeah. That's the problem, which is why Wong's call now is so premature and so wrong. Sorry, Sharri. Sorry, Richo. Housing very important, but I agree with my learned.
But I would.
I agree with my learned friend Senator Richardson.
Just on that point, I actually also had a conversation with Bill Clinton the year before in 2000 when he was here, and he spoke about how his biggest regret was not being able to get a solution, achieve peace in the Middle East. And, it's not for want of trying, and it's not for the want of Israel not coming to the table either. And that's why the tone of Penny Wong last night, she acts as though the pressure's completely on Israel. Well, they can't even get Hamas to agree to a ceasefire deal. They can't even get Hamas to agree to release the hostages. The deal's been on the table for some 7 weeks now. A far too generous deal, in my opinion. It's releasing too many Palestinians in return for the hostages, but that is the deal that's been on the table for 7 weeks and nothing's happened. All right, let's get to some other topics. The New South Wales Police Commissioner Karen Webbs, we've seen this merry-go-round of spin doctors and now yet another, the fifth media advisor she's had, Adam Wallace. The Daily Telegraph revealing that the former media director for New South Wales Health will start in this cursed role tomorrow. Richo, one police commissioner, 5 media advisors. What does this actually say about Karen Webb?
I think she must be a very difficult woman to get on with. I mean, you can always understand losing 1 or 2 staff, but not one after the other just keeps going. There's got to be some problem right at the base of this, and obviously she doesn't know how to fix it. And it shouldn't be just about spin doctors. I mean, there should be more to life than that. But in this modern age, they've become very important. And what we have to do is try and move back, in my view, to getting just not spin doctors, but people who actually tell us the truth. I mean, that'd be nice for a change, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Now, just before we go, final topic, an Indigenous elder has suggested exempting Aboriginal people from land tax, including stamp duty and council rates. Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen isn't ruling out this idea, but Jacinta Price has slammed it, saying these proposals are outlandish and insulting. These are Jacinta Price's words. She says these separatist policies have failed and were rejected by the Australian people at the referendum. Michael, what do you think about this?
Well, Jacinta's absolutely right. I mean, this whole notion of grievance and going back 200 years, I mean, really, this has got to come to an end. It's got to stop. I mean, there's no reason why Aboriginal people shouldn't pay land tax. There's no reason why they should have free university courses, subsidised home loans. That was 200 years ago. We're now in the modern era. They've got as much opportunity as every other person. Yes, they come from disadvantaged backgrounds, but there are hundreds of thousands of people in this country who came to this country with absolutely nothing, many of them Jewish after the war, I might add, who are now doing incredibly well through their own, hard work, self-advancement and working hard in the community. You can't keep, people living off these kind of welfare handouts on the basis of what happened 200 years ago. It's not good for them, it's not good for the country, and it's never a good thing to divide this country by race. And this is another example of what they're trying to do here, and it's the wrong thing to do.
Richo, what's your view on this controversial idea?
Every malcontent that we've got wants to be a victim. And frankly, I'm just sick of victimhood. Totally and utterly sick of it. Just get off your ass and do something sensible. Just get a job, move on, work, try. And I think people have just given up, some of these people. And then what we're supposed to do when they give up is we're supposed to pay for their lack of interest in continuing on. Well, I think that's ridiculous.
Right, Graham Richardson, Michael Kroger, thank you both so much for joining me. Now, coming up is Labor's promise to halve migration by July. Just another political stunt. I'll speak to James Paterson about this. Also, the Prime Minister rules out welfare boost and cost of living relief. Ross Greenwood will join me next. Stay tuned. All right, as we've been reporting, Foreign Minister Penny Wong has given up her pre-election pretense that she supports Israel and the Jewish community. By the way, Ross Greenwood is going to join me here in a moment to speak about the massive changes to mergers and acquisitions that the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, has announced today. But now let's bring in Shadow Home Affairs Minister James Paterson. Good to see you, James. Now, your colleague, Simon Birmingham, has written a brilliant piece for The Nightly. He says that Penny Wong is acquiescing to Hamas by giving them this recognition while they're still in control, just 6 months after a terror attack. What do you think about this proposition?
Sure, I thought Simon put it brilliantly, as did Peter Dutton in a speech tonight in the Tom Hughes oration, where he excoriated the Albanese government and Penny Wong for this shocking betrayal of the Australian Jewish community and this shocking treatment of our friend Israel. I mean, if you told Hamas on the 6th of October that if they undertake the next day the worst atrocity against the Jewish people since the end of the Holocaust, that the outcome of that will be Australia brings forward its unilateral, premature recognition of a Palestinian statehood, they would have laughed at you. They would have thought that was a ridiculous idea. But that's exactly what the Albanese government is proposing to do, unless, of course, this is just a cynical political domestic play, which in fact in some ways makes it even worse. This is a sensitive international security issue. It should be handled consistent with the decades of bipartisanship in this country, which is that we do support a two-state solution, but it cannot be imposed unilaterally from the outside. It can only come as a result of peace negotiations between the parties. And right now, Israel has no negotiating partner who is willing to enter into any sort of peace arrangement.
James, what about this contradiction? Penny Wong says there can be no role for Hamas in the future of Gaza, quite rightly. But then she says there needs to be an immediate ceasefire. Israel needs to lay down its arms now. It shouldn't go into Rafah, which is where the Hamas fighters have retreated to. So how does she actually propose that Hamas leaves Gaza? I mean, what fantasy world is she living in?
Sharri, it's such a glaring contradiction at the heart of this government's Middle East policy that even the ABC pointed it out when she appeared on Radio National. How on earth does Penny think Hamas is going to be removed from power in Gaza if there's to be a unilateral ceasefire and the IDF is to withdraw? Do we think Hamas, having achieved what would effectively be a military victory over the IDF in these circumstances, who continue to hold hostages, who continue to control territory, is just going to give up their arms after the IDF withdraws? They're just going to become peaceful proponents after that? I seriously doubt it. And it is impossible to reconcile these two propositions from the government. One, let's get rid of Hamas, Hamas should go. But two, no one should do anything to remove them. It's utterly absurd. Of course, the IDF and Israel has to continue to pursue their legitimate military objective, which is the removal of those remaining Hamas brigades in the south of Gaza around Rafah. That's the only way the hostages will be freed. That's the only way that the people of Gaza will be freed from the oppression of Hamas.
Just on another topic, there's been an extraordinary investigation that's just been published on The Nightly. They've uncovered that the Australian Strategic Policy Institute is a priority target of Chinese spies. And they're reporting text messages between the hackers that they say have shown that they've been hired by the Chinese government with signed documents, seemingly from the government agencies, from the Cyberspace Administration of China. And yet, over here in Australia, our government, Anthony Albanese and Glenn Davis, are doing a review of whether ASPI should even get funding from the Commonwealth. What do you think of this amazing report that's been published this evening?
It is an extraordinary report by James King for The Nightly, and it shows some pretty sloppy tradecraft from these state-sponsored hackers who appear to be guns for hire that have been commissioned by Chinese state agencies to target a range of entities around the world, including ASPI. And if confirmed, it does indicate what we all know, which is that ASPI is a favoured target of the Chinese Communist Party and its agencies, because ASPI has exposed some of the horrendous conduct of the Chinese government over the recent years, in particular its human rights abuses in Xinjiang, but also its behaviour in Hong Kong, in the South China Sea, in the East China Sea, across the Taiwan Straits, even in our own democracy. I mean, ASPI research has been globally influential for an Australian think tank, has changed the conversation about the West's relationship with China in a positive way because it's brought reality to the eyes of all of us. So the prospect that the Albanese government is going to strip funding away from ASPI, I think, is a scandal, and as we know, was a demand of the Chinese government on the list of 14 demands.
Yeah, all right. Just very quickly, the Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neil today committed to apparently halving migration by the 1st of July. Here's what she said.
We had the borders shut for the better part of 2 years, and as is normal after a border closure, there was a boost in migration for the year that followed. What's happened since then is our government has taken action to halve migration for our country. We are doing that because we want to make sure that we maintain support for this really important program. We're happy to have migration here in Australia, but we want that to be sustainable.
James, I mean, is this feasible?
I thought I understood our migration program and our migration numbers before that interview, but now I'm as confused as Claire O'Neil appears to be about her own portfolio. Over the last year, Sharri, 750,000 people came to Australia. It's a record. It's about 3 times the long-term average. To get that down to normal levels, as Dan Tehan pointed out today, would require over the next 9 months just 100,000 people coming to Australia. Now, that will be a hell of a turnaround. I'm a little bit sceptical of the government to deliver it, but we will be watching closely. And if they don't, I'm sure Claire O'Neil will have a very cogent explanation as to why.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, James Patterson, thank you very much for joining me for your Sharp analysis as always. Now, let's have a look at today's big announcement from Treasurer Jim Chalmers on the merger crackdown. Chalmers is giving sweeping new powers to the competition regulator to decide which takeovers and mergers can go through and which will be rejected. Under the new rules, the competition watchdog, the ACCC, will be able to detect and block what it views as anti-competitive mergers and acquisitions. Here was the Treasurer today.
What we want to do is we want to look at mergers which have the potential to substantially lessen competition, but over time that might have a creeping impact. And so what we want to do is to strengthen the ACCC's hand when it comes to looking at troubling mergers.
Already, though, this evening, the Fin Review is reporting that the plans could kill off the startup sector. Well, here to break it down for us is Sky News business editor Ross Greenwood. Great to see you as always, Ross.
Sharri, no problems.
Look, what's your analysis of this new major change, giving the ACCC quite extraordinary powers? Is it a good idea?
Yeah, well, it is, but just backtrack to Australia itself. Remember, we're a country of about 26, 27 million people. We're spread out all over the place, and we are really the land of the great duopoly. Even now, there might be 3 big supermarkets there, 4 including Metcash and RGA. Go to, 2 major airlines. Rex sits on the side as well as a smaller one. But you go to pharmacies, there's a couple of really big players. You go to a whole lot of areas and you see 2 or 3 big players just about everywhere. Banks, 4 big banks, right? So you get this sense that there is market pressure pretty much everywhere, concentration. So the idea for the ACCC is it has to review any takeover or merger that's of a certain size. That's part of these laws that Jim Chalmers is bringing in, which is good. But Gina Cass-Gottlieb, who is the chair of the ACCC, who's been there for 2 years...
You interviewed her this afternoon.
I interviewed her this afternoon, and she has been consistently calling for more powers. And the reason for it is that she is often blindsided as to when takeovers and mergers occur. Effectively, the deal is done before it's even brought to the ACCC. So this is a big shake-up that means that anybody who wants a merger or a takeover basically has to engage the ACCC much earlier. So just have a listen to Gina Cass-Gottlieb when I spoke to her this afternoon.
We welcome the set of merger reforms the Treasurer has announced, Ross. We think that they will better enable us to see the mergers that matter and also to be able to prevent those that are going to be anti-competitive.
There's a couple of questions from this, Ross. Firstly is already the criticism that it could kill off the startup sector. But secondly, there's a reason that M&A proposals are kept top secret until a decision has been made.
Yes.
And this could change the structure of how that all operates if you have to start engaging with the ACCC and get, extra teams involved.
Well, that's right. But at some point you would have to engage with them anyway. Now, but there's a couple of takeovers I want to take you to. One is really quite classic, and that's, strangely, in the pet industry. Now, there's a company called Petstock, and Petstock basically had Woolworths as a major shareholder. Woolworths decided it wanted to take 55% of Petstock. But Petstock, in the meantime, been gobbling up all these other small pet operations that gained a massive market share. The ACCC didn't even know it was doing this. So by the time that Woolworths came along and effectively said, hey, we're going to take control of this, it meant that Woolworths would have had significant control of the pet supplies industry in Australia. So they did the deal with a court enforcement to basically force Petstock, Woolworths, to sell 41 stores, to make certain they weren't completely dominant in all these areas. So that's one example. The second example, which is interesting, because here the ACCC got beaten, and that was when the ANZ wanted to take over Suncorp, the banking operations of the Queensland bank and insurance giant. Now, that was held up for 12 months. So the real issue that you point out about as well, any merger or takeover, it's timely. It needs to happen quickly. So if you're waiting for 12 months or 18 months for decisions and inquiries, all that type of thing, it's not good for Australia. So in this particular situation, there has to be at least an interim decision from the ACCC within 30 days. And then if there needs to be further inquiries, they can go on and ultimately into court. So, but you do recognise... Which
makes sense, because you can't imagine the bureaucracy working past 5 p.m, let alone midnight or 1 a.m. like the teams at Macquarie do.
But think about markets moving and the fact that while you're actually having an investigation, the markets have moved. The takeover might not make sense anymore. So this is all a part and parcel of the reason why you need to have a very efficient monitoring system for takeovers so you don't have concentrated powers in places you didn't expect. But at the same time, you need to have swift sort of decision-making to ensure that these deals do go through if they are going to.
Yeah. Now, the lead up to the budget next month in May, there's a lot of talk about tax reform or the lack thereof it. Piece in the Fin Review today by John Keogh. He says that Jim Chalmers and his predecessor Josh Frydenberg, while they were savvy communicators, he says, and I'm quoting now, they've appeared less interested in rocking the boat on tax reform and more focused on preserving power to pave the way to the Lodge to fulfil their prime ministerial ambitions. So this comparison between treasurers of the past who have been highly ambitious and what we're seeing now, I don't know if I agree with that comparison. What do you think?
Well, it's funny because when they changed the stage 3 tax cuts came in, I interviewed Jim Chalmers at that stage and basically said to him, you know, over the course of about 8 to 10 years, it's going to cost an extra $25 billion. But I said, listen, by the time that money actually hits the budget, you're going to be the Prime Minister. You're going to be the one who has to deal with this, right? So don't imagine...
Did he laugh or how did he react?
There's a little laugh, keeps on going. Yeah. But the reality is that tax reform is not just tinkering at the edges with these tax scales. That's a part of it. But it's actually going to the very heart of changing the way in which Australia goes. That's how we get productivity. That's how we can hold interest rates down. That's how Australia generally does better. Look, I'll throw one little example at you that I've got in my head and I've had it for a long time. Why does a person who pays PAYG wages, a person who just every day turns up, pays their taxes, why do they have to put in a tax form? Well, why?
Good point.
Why? Why don't, instead of them putting in a tax form,
thank you.
Why don't you
for
basically
that great
say,
idea.
right, number 2, why don't we have work-related expenses? Why don't we just take them all out? And everybody just does it. Nobody has to put in a tax form. Now, if you want to negatively gear a property, you put your tax form. If you're a business, put in a tax form. If you're an ordinary PAYG taxpayer with $200 worth of expenses, don't bother.
I tell you what, Ross, that is the best tax reform idea I have ever heard, not actually having to fill out forms for your taxes because the money comes out of your pocket anyway.
Precisely.
It's such a good idea.
By the way, give those people some money. So give them a bit of cost of living relief and make their lives a bit easier. So there's little things like that that are never thought about that would actually change people's lives and make them happier and maybe actually make them like the government a bit more as well. So, you know, as I say, tax reform takes all... That's one small example. But there's so many other ways about trying to even up the playing field to make certain that people basically feel as though they're getting more bang for their buck and that when they work, they're not actually working for the tax office and the government. They feel as though they're keeping a bit more of it themselves.
Yeah. All right. We're out of time, Ross Greenwood. Thank you so much.
No problems at all.
Now, after the break, Bill Shorten talks tough on how the NDIS billions are spent, but still dangerous criminals are exploiting government handouts. I'll speak about this with my political panel next. Welcome back. Well, let's bring in now National Senator Bridget McKenzie and former Labor MP Michael Danby. Welcome to you both. Look, let's start with the appointment of the new ADF chief, David Johnston, this week. Bridget, there's been a lot of criticism from Michael Shoebridge, Greg Sheridan, Peter Jennings, that it's just more of the same leadership. What do you think?
Well, obviously, we want to thank Angus Campbell, the outgoing CDF, for his service to this country and wish Vice Admiral David Johnston all the very best in the new appointment come July. I think the first battle the new CDF is going to face is actually convincing the Defence Minister of the geostrategic issues that we've got before us and to ensure that the Minister has the fights within ERC, has the fights around the cabinet table to make sure our Defence Force has the investment that it needs in capability to actually meet those geostrategic challenges.
Yeah, it is a very volatile environment that we're living in at the moment. On another topic, NDIS Minister Bill Shorten has reminded states that being a violent criminal is actually not a disability after we've had some shocking stories this week. Michael Danby, how do you think the federal government is handling this misuse of NDIS funds?
Well, badly. I think there's a huge expenditure on this admittedly humanitarian area where we all should have sympathy with people who have disabilities, but we're spending much more than we planned when the scheme was framed. And Bill has not only to solve this particularly odious case, but the level of expenditure that we're making, say compared to defence, which is being very poorly spent on compared to other Western economies facing the China challenge.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually, Bridget, when the comparison between the amount of our, the proportion of our budget spent on NDIS versus defence.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, we want to live in the type of society where we care for the most vulnerable, and we are all on a unity ticket for that. The NDIS has bipartisan support. But you've got to ask questions about the criteria, the way it's being run, when currently it would seem the NDIS is being used to transition people from the justice system into the community with serious psychosocial issues, and using the NDIS to solve those or to address those is not why it was set up. The Minister, Bill Shorten, I hope he is going to actually reform the NDIS, but of the 640,000 Australians that are on it, we need to know how many are serious criminals, how many workers and carers are being exposed daily to potentially people who've committed serious crimes.
Michael Danby, Foreign Minister Penny Wong last night, as we've been speaking about, outlined her case for a future Palestinian state, essentially rewarding Hamas for the attack 6 months ago.
Yeah. Penny Wong and Elbow shout and bully at the tiny democracy Israel in the Middle East, but they're pussycats when it comes to China. Never hear a word from them about the Uyghurs or the Tibetans or the poor people in Hong Kong who are crushed every day under the communist boot. Never a word. But after Israel, despite the fact that they dismissed those two officers and considering charges by themselves, we have the chutzpah to have an Australian air marshal being appointed to supervise the Israeli democracy. My goodness me, can you imagine if America or the UK said we'd have an investigation into the civilian deaths caused by ADF according to the Brereton report? We wouldn't tolerate it. Interfering in a democracy for bogus virtue signalling reasons here to the Greens and to the Western Sydney seats.
Bridget?
Michael's absolutely right, as usual, on this topic, Sharri. I think it's been an appalling 24 hours for Penny Wong to actually pay domestic politics with such a serious issue, as if Penny Wong, in her naive display last night at ANU, was somehow going to be the peace broker in the Middle East. She's just kidding herself. This is absolutely a domestic play here at home for those who are sympathetic to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. When asked this morning on the ABC, if, Foreign Minister, you don't think Hamas has any future in Gaza, what is your response to the incursion in Rafah? And she couldn't answer it, because the only way to make sure Hamas has no future in Gaza is to allow the IDF to get into Rafah, get rid of the last 4 to 6 battalions of Hamas, and then we can demilitarise Gaza, and Arab states can play a really significant role in de-radicalising that part of the world over coming generations. But until you get rid of Hamas, who are you actually dealing with to talk about a two-state solution, which is pie-in-the-sky stuff to win votes from the Greens in inner-city seats, and it's incredibly divisive when we've always had a bipartisan approach to this particular topic.
Bridget, Wong and Elbow can't even solve the juvenile delinquency problem in Alice Springs.
Exactly.
How are they going to solve the Middle East from Adelaide? I mean, what a joke. What a joke they both are on this. They know nothing. Why don't you go there, Elbow? Are you a coward?
Yeah, and can I just, Michael, you're dead right. I mean, we've heard a lot about the tragic death of a foreign aid worker, an Australian, but that is the second Australian killed in this conflict. And when she had the chance as Foreign Minister to attend the kibbutz where, the other Australian actually lost their life at the hands of Hamas, she did not take up the opportunity, and Albo needs to rock up there and actually show that he backs.
And Wong needs to go to Ukraine. The both of them just don't seem to go where the action is.
We need our own show, Michael.
Yeah. So that's Dalit Carbone. I actually had her brother on the show this week, and he said the same thing, that Penny Wong didn't bother to visit the south, the kibbutz, where she was murdered. Just very quickly before we go, Michael Danby, is this the end of the Labor Party for the Jews? I mean, you were part of Labor. When you were there was strong support for Israel and the Jewish community. It seems to have completely evaporated now. Not one Labor figure stood up today. Is this the end?
I'm ashamed of the Labor Party on this issue. We're refunding UNRWA despite the UN Commission not being finished, demanding ceasefires when the war isn't finished, imposing people to go over there and supervise their democracy. It would never have happened in my day. Things have changed radically since I've left, since Michael Kelly left, Stephen Conroy, and above all our dear beloved Kimberly Kitching, who was so persecuted by this same Wong, who won't have any investigation into her activities, but wants investigation into other people overseas activities.
Yes, good point. All right, we've got to go. Michael Danby, Bridget McKenzie, thank you both very much. Now, after the break, we'll continue on this topic. One person who runs a group that was misled by Penny Wong before the last election. Stay tuned. All right, let's bring in now Australia, Israel and Jewish Affairs Council Executive Director Colin Rubenstein. Colin, great to see you. Look, one thing that Penny Wong seemed to miss in her speech last night is that the Palestinian territories actually don't meet the official requirements for statehood, do they?
They certainly do not, and there never has been a Palestinian state, as your most viewers would know. And very sadly, her speech, to put it politely, was full of contradictions and very confusing, because on the one hand, she understands that Hamas has no role in the future and the Palestinian Authority has to be significantly reformed. But then, of course, in suggesting that there could be early recognition of a Palestinian state, she is undermining the prospects of emboldening the moderates and creating a pathway towards a two-state solution. What she's creating is reinforcing extremism and bloodshed, and in a very sort of insulting sort of way, setting up the special advisor and also implying Israel's not complying with international law and imposing starvation. This is fueling animosity in a way that's unbecoming, I think, of responsible political leadership.
Yes, fueling anti-Semitism. Colin, how badly did Penny Wong and Albanese mislead Jewish groups like yours before the last election when she said that Middle East policy would be identical to the coalition's?
Well, if that's what they were saying, of course, it's not been the case. I think many people were aware of the political history of both of those leaders, particularly the Prime Minister. Senator Wong has been to Israel and, knowledgeable about the situation. So it's particularly disappointing that she would raise this prospect of recognising a Palestinian state soon, when that, of course, would, as your commentators this evening have pointed out time and again, that would reward and reinforce extremism, when she offers no pathway for undermining and dismantling Hamas, which is a must if they were to move forward. And, of course, people forget the Palestinian Authority is not exactly moderate.
No,
it's rejected.
Far from it. Far from it. Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologise. I always run out of time in this last segment. Colin Rubenstein, thank you so much. And I'll see you tomorrow. Here's Paul Murray.